The United Nations General Assembly is underway here in New York. What are the goals for this year? Hello, I'm Anand Naidoo with this special edition of The Heat. Don't bring me a speech, bring me a plan. That's the plea from United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres as world leaders gather here at the UN. During this special edition of The Heat, I spoke with General Assembly President Tijjani Muhammad-Bande about issues like climate change and poverty alleviation, and asked him, what can the UN do to tackle these challenges? Mr. President, thanks for joining us and congratulations on your election. You assume office at a time when the world continues to face major challenges. What are going to be your priorities?
Well, thank you very much for giving an opportunity to have a conversation with you. Thirdly, it's important. Our priorities are pretty well known, and they are not new. They are really basic things that are fundamental to the organization. The first and most important one, of course, is peace and security. Beyond this, we have elements within the SDGs, namely poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. These are the main priorities of the presidency.
So let's talk about one of the biggest challenges facing the world right now. Some would say the biggest challenge facing the world right now, and that's climate change. During this session, there will be a climate summit, which will be hosted by the Secretary General. What can we expect?
Well, I think the Secretary General has been very clear, and countries and organizations have also been on top of this matter as an important one. And the idea is really to give a lot of priority to the whole question of action. We have not been on target with the reduction of the emissions, but to have countries and regions not only recommit, but also in particular in this summit to show what it is that they have done to really get to the point that we have agreed to do in Paris in 2015. I think that is important. Now, there are challenges to that in terms of financing, in terms of even sharing of information and the technologies required for this. But these are difficulties you expect in an organization of a variety of states in different positions. But the ravaging of countries and regions because of the change that we have seen in the last decade or two, I think has made it necessary, and the urgency is not lost on heads of state and government. And the summit, I think, is focused on not only sharing of information and ideas, but also to people to showcase what it is they are doing to really get us back on track. I think that is the issue.
You talk about the fact that some countries have already been ravaged by climate change. Has the United Nations ever given any thought to the nexus between climate change and global security? We could see food shortages, we could see water shortages, we could see the mass movement of people. There's a lot of potential here for violence to break out in many instances. Has there been, what kind of urgency is the UN giving this?
I think that more and more there is an understanding, not only analytically, but in terms of the understanding by political leaders in the idea of a connection or a nexus between climate change and not only movement, but even conflict. I think most of the conflict around the lectured area, I think, is driven by climate issues, movements as well. So I think that is more and more. The Security Council has also begun to see how a connection can be made between climate and conflict. The General Assembly has long seen this as important, and many discussions around climate action have also drawn our attention to the connections or interconnections among climate, migration, and economic growth indeed.
There's another challenge which you would face, which the UN would face, and that is how do you meet, how do you counter those who deny that climate change is caused by human activity?
Well, I think the numbers of those are not really that significant, even if some of them may have some power. But the reality of the matter is that...
But they are powerful.
Some are powerful.
Right.
But again, in terms of what actions are taken, I think all countries are doing things, perhaps not to the speed or scale would want, but I think the question of the science of it being somehow wrong, I don't think that's really a debate at the UN. I think for the United Nations and the scientific community, it is very clear there is a connection and also that there is an urgency.
But I guess the challenge would be convincing some key member states that the science is true, that the science is there, that this is caused by human activity.
Yeah, some key member states, that is true. But I think go beyond the nation state, go to cities. And mayors of cities around the world are meeting as mayors to say that there is action that can be taken. Companies, because really a lot of these issues are driven not only by the policy of government, but also by some way policy of corporations. And more, I think the corporate world is seeing that it makes sense to deal with this as a serious matter, even in terms of competition. And I think we are not really at the point that there is a gloom that nothing will happen because some countries, one or two, for example, or three, have some doubts. But cities are significant, and cities and companies are where the actions are. And this should give us a sense that, well, more broadly, I think the global community is convinced that there is something there to the science, and it is important that action be taken collectively.
I want to talk about some of the specifics that you mentioned in your list of priorities a moment ago, one of them being the alleviation of poverty, alleviation of hunger. What's the plan here?
The plan is this. One, I'm glad you have taken them together. Clearly, when you eliminate extreme poverty, you guarantee further the dignity of individuals and communities and societies. And you also guarantee that those individuals are able to send their children to school, they are able to afford health care, they are able to get things that make them a bit more comfortable and less prone to disruption. And they also are better able to contribute to the well-being of all of us. Now, the same with hunger. And our approach is a clear one. We think that we have reached a stage in human history where we can eliminate hunger. The technologies and the knowledge of production of food is such that we can produce enough for everyone. And it's the same with poverty. We have enough to deal with extreme poverty. Now, these ones are not new things, and that's why we crafted the vision around already agreed things. One, the number one problem in the world is extreme poverty, and its eradication has been agreed to by all delegations only like 4 years ago. And this is still an urgent matter. And the issue that poverty and hunger are known to all societies, all countries have segments that struggle with this, and we see also what it does to the dignity of persons living in those societies. And this is something that I think we as a global community must address as serious and important. And to do this, whether it is in the area of policy, whether in the area of sharing of science and technology, whether in the area of partnerships to get things done in a better way. I think there are several elements that can come into it, whether it's an issue of policies of trade, in terms of fair trade, whether it's policy of how you sustain the environment to further guarantee this is possible on a sustainable basis. All these are connected together.
Something that is closely allied, of course, with poverty and hunger, and that is the provision of health care for people around the world. What is the UN doing about that?
I think the UN has done a lot in terms of protocols relating to health issues, pandemics, and also policy and sharing of information. And at the beginning of this session, of course, we are having the whole universal health coverage. This is important for the global community, and every year a lot is being done on this matter. And there are organizations of the United Nations, of the world, that are targeting this. And I think that is an area that progress has been made, even if in some instances, again, we could do a bit more if we had better policies.
What can you tell us about efforts to reinforce women's rights? You've been talking about this personally. You've said that this is something that you're devoted to, and it would start right here in your office. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think it's a simple observation that if you are to achieve the goals and to also have the whole notion that we are in an era of dignity of human persons, you certainly are therefore necessarily must be committed to the idea of one half of humanity must be on the table, at the table, to discuss policies, to be part of whatever it is, and it's even counterproductive that you have one half of the population not as engaged as they could be in the national or global effort to solve global problems. And that is something that countries are committed to. There is a whole session of some months at the UN every year, the Commission on the Status of Women, that looks at events, and the Beijing conference was really important in world politics, in bringing to the focused attention on the matter.
We're now what, Beijing plus 25?
Yeah, we're getting, and this, yeah, so we'll get to it 25, and I think there are continuing challenges, but more broadly, I think all countries have made progress in some way, but again, we shall have that review process, and I think the verdict will be clear at that time. But I think it is an important matter in terms of even the utilitarian approach to it, let alone even the whole philosophical basis that you have to have equality of human persons. So by every account, this is an important goal for humanity.
Yeah, you bring experience to this job, you bring your expertise to this job. You were previously the Director General of CAFRAD, which promotes good governance. What do you make of governance in the world today? We still see massive corruption in many countries, no accountability. We don't see democracy being implemented in many countries. So what are you bringing to it?
Well, I think the first thing that is so obvious that we miss it is that we are talking about corruption. There were times when we didn't even talk about it. We couldn't even talk about it. Now everyone is talking about how we can have transparency, accountability. These are elements not only of corporate governance, but political governance as well. And the very idea that no government is free from the pressures of the world, all public opinion concerning corruption. And the very idea that governments come to say we are here because we have to get rid of corruption because it is a national cancer that we have to address. I think that is something. There are also approaches to how this is done better in terms of technical approaches, but the whole idea that youth are also involved. Civil society actors have played a key role also in getting attention to this subject. And I think we are certainly in a better position than we were 10, 15 years, 20 years ago relating to corruption.
Mr. President, major challenges that the UN will face, you will face major challenges as President of the General Assembly. But all this comes at a time when where there is a growing rejection on the part of many countries, including countries like the United States, on the whole concept of multilateralism. And we see that, we hear that all the time. How does the UN make itself relevant?
I think the UN is relevant, and more, whatever our national politics relating to how far we want to reach out to others, I think no country has left the United Nations lately. And no country, I think, will succeed outside the United Nations, frankly, on a grand scale. And we can quibble in the family concerning the best approach to it, but I think there are predispositions to doing it things a bit less in a multilateral forum, but no, the multilateralism is, I think, understood to be the only way the only way out for all of us. I cannot see any country within the UN that will simply ignore the UN. I think it is a forum that has done well, and we give credit to the founding fathers and mothers of the organization I think that has to be really underscored, despite whatever predispositions we see. But I think multilateralism has worked. It's working. We continue to find better ways of doing it, even as people assert sovereignty a bit more on some matters. But I think, no, we have not gone to the point where we have jettisoned multilateralism. The very idea that we are having over 140 heads of state and government coming to New York this year tells you it is alive and well.
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
After the break, we'll take a look at the efforts the United Nations is making to take its message to the world. You're watching a special edition of The Heat coming to you from New York. Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidoo. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists and others. It's a fresh, focused and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict or US politics, The Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find The Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search The Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.